Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the main event.
Ever notice how cybersecurity guidance keeps evolving, like a city rebuilding its sewers while everyone's still flushing? Today we're tackling a major update that's quietly shifting the rules of the road, a new iteration of a national cybersecurity framework that puts governance and supply chain front and center. Why should leaders care right now, and what actually changes for organizations big and small?
Love that sewer metaphor, unglamorous but critical. At its core, the update reframes cybersecurity from a purely technical checklist into an organizational responsibility that starts at the top. It urges boards and executives to move beyond delegating everything to IT and instead own decisions about risk appetite, supplier trust, and ongoing oversight. That's the big behavioral change. Governance is no longer a sidebar, it's the main act.
So governance rises in priority. But governance is such an abstract term for many listeners. What does that practically mean for a mid-sized company that has limited security staff? Are we talking about one more committee meeting or something deeper?
Practical governance means clear roles, measurable expectations, and integrated decision-making. For a mid-sized company, it could start with a few concrete steps: formalizing who is accountable for third-party risk, defining which risks require escalation to the executive team, and setting measurable goals for supplier security performance. It doesn't have to be a heavyweight bureaucracy, it can be a short roadmap that aligns procurement, legal, IT, and operations, so they speak the same risk language.
Measurable goals, that's interesting. Too often improve security lives on a sticky note. What kinds of metrics are useful without becoming noise or box-checking vanity metrics?
Great question. Useful metrics connect to outcomes and decision-making. Instead of number of patches applied, aim for metrics like time to detect for supply chain anomalies, percentage of critical suppliers with evidence-based security controls, or mean time to contain a supplier-related incident. Also track the distribution of risk, how many suppliers are critical versus low impact, and the financial exposure tied to those tiers. Metrics should drive action. If a supplier score drops, what are the predefined remediation or termination triggers?
That makes sense. Metrics that inform policy rather than just decorate a dashboard. The framework update also emphasizes supply chain, which is a massive landscape. How do teams even begin to map it when many suppliers are layered and opaque?
Start with a prioritized map. Think of it as concentric circles. Your direct suppliers are the inner ring. Their suppliers and software libraries are the next ring outward. You don't need a perfect map of every offshore subcontractor on day one. Identify critical functions and systemic dependencies, cloud providers, identity providers, payment processors, proprietary code libraries, and map those first. Use contractual requirements for transparency, require software bills of materials where feasible, and combine questionnaires, attestations, and selective technical validation to fill gaps.
Concentric circles, nice image. But what about companies that rely on dozens of small vendors who lack maturity? How do you balance security requirements with the reality that many small businesses can't meet enterprise-grade controls?
That's where risk-based tiering and capacity building come into play. Not every supplier needs the same bar. Categorize suppliers by the impact of a failure: data exfiltration risk, operational disruption, regulatory exposure. For small vendors in non-critical roles, set baseline requirements and offer support or phased improvement plans. For critical suppliers, insist on stronger assurances like independent audits, penetration tests, or joint contingency planning. It's both carrot and stick. Leverage procurement terms to require improvements, but also provide realistic timelines and resources where possible.
You mentioned SBOM software bills of materials earlier. They've become a buzzword. How realistic is it for organizations to demand SBOMs across their supplier base? And what value does an SBOM actually provide?
SBOMs are an increasingly practical tool. They're essentially inventories of software components, which helps you detect whether vulnerable components are present in your environment. For packaged software and cloud services, Obtaining an SBOM should be feasible and is becoming an industry expectation. The challenge is ingestion and actionability. You need processes to consume SBOMs, correlate them with internal assets, and trigger remediation when vulnerabilities appear. So an SBOM is not a silver bullet, but it's a foundational artifact for faster response and clearer accountability.
Okay, artifacts, metrics, tiers, it's a lot. How should boards be briefed so they don't get lost in technical weeds but still have the right steering capability?
Boards need concise, risk-focused dashboards and scenario-based briefings. Translate technical findings into business impact. What does this vulnerability mean for revenue, brand, or operations? Use risk heat maps, trend lines, and clear escalation criteria. Also run tabletop scenarios for board members, simulate a supplier breach, and walk through decisions about disclosure, supplier termination, and customer impact. The framework encourages boards to own policy-level decisions on acceptable supply chain risk, not to micromanage patches.
You said scenario-based briefings. That sounds useful and a bit like crisis rehearsal. How often should organizations run these exercises and who should be involved?
At minimum, once a year for governance-level exercises, and more often for operational drills. Involve cross-functional stakeholders, legal, procurement, IT, communications, and representatives from critical suppliers when appropriate. These exercises reveal blind spots, for example, who actually has authority to pause a service, or how quickly contracts allow you to demand remediation. They turn theory into executable playbooks.
Speaking of contracts, procurement often becomes the gatekeeper to security. What contractual levers are recommended to shift supplier behavior effectively?
Contracts can require baseline cybersecurity controls, incident notification timelines, right-to-audit clauses, and SBOM delivery. Importantly, contracts should clarify liability and remediation obligations and tiered service-level agreements tied to security performance. But remember, clauses are only as good as enforcement. Pair contractual requirements with monitoring and the willingness to enforce consequences, whether that's remediation timelines, reduced scope, or contract termination.
Enforcement sounds easier said than done. Politically and commercially, companies are often hesitant to push back on major vendors. How do you deal with strategic suppliers who resist transparency?
That's a political dance many face. Start by differentiating between systemic vendors, ones you can't easily replace, and tactical suppliers. For large strategic vendors, negotiate operational transparency and shared improvement roadmaps rather than hardline ultimatums. Where regulatory frameworks allow, collaborate via industry groups to push for standardized practices. And document the residual risk. If you accept a supplier's opacity, make sure the board and executives accept the associated business risk formally.
Collaboration, I hear that a lot. Does the updated framework encourage sharing between organizations or sectors, or is it more inward-looking?
It encourages both. Supply chain resilience is ecosystemic. Vulnerabilities ripple across sectors. The guidance promotes information sharing, coordinated incident response, and common standards that can reduce friction. Public-private partnerships and sector-specific consortia can accelerate adoption of practices like SBOMs, common questionnaires, and joint monitoring. But sharing needs guardrails. Privacy, antitrust considerations, and reputational risks must be managed.
You've painted this picture of coordinated action, but resources are finite. What's the prioritized roadmap for a security leader who needs to show progress in 90 days and tangible change in a year?
In 90 days, establish governance basics, define roles, create a supplier inventory for critical services, implement tiering, and ensure board-level visibility through a short briefing. Start requiring SBOMs or basic security attestations for new critical suppliers. Within a year, mature continuous monitoring. Verify remediation capabilities for critical suppliers. Integrate SBOM ingestion and vulnerability correlation. Run at least one cross-functional tabletop exercise and embed supply chain clauses into standard procurement contracts. These milestones show rapid governance improvements while building technical maturity.
That roadmap is doable and compelling. Let's talk about real-world consequences. Do you have an example illustrating the difference governance can make when a supply chain issue arises?
Imagine two companies using the same third-party analytics service. Company 1 had governance, supplier tiers, contractual response times, and an SBOM policy. When the analytics provider suffered a software compromise, Company 1 quickly identified which internal systems used the vulnerable component, isolated them, and invoked contractual remediation. Communications were coordinated, and downtime was contained. Company 2 lacked governance. The same vulnerability led to weeks of uncertainty, broader outages, and a delayed public disclosure. The difference wasn't luck, it was governance and preparation.
That anecdote really highlights the split between preparedness and improvisation. On a more philosophical note, the framework hints at a shift from preventing every breach to managing inevitable incidents. How should organizations reconcile that with their security culture?
Shift the narrative from perfection to resilience. Security culture should prize detection, containment, and recovery as much as prevention. That means investing in monitoring, backups, segmented architecture, and rapid supplier remediation. Reward people for reporting near misses, and normalize tabletop exercises so responses are reflexive. It's like safe driving. We still wear seatbelts and have airbags because accidents happen. Similarly, we plan for incidents rather than assume impermeability.
The resilience angle connects well to business continuity, but what about regulatory pressures? Many sectors now face compliance requirements tied to supply chain security. How should organizations align their governance to both the framework's guidance and evolving regulations?
Treat the framework as a flexible blueprint that complements regulations. Use it to build governance aligned with regulatory expectations, documented policies, supplier risk assessments, incident reporting timelines, and enforceable contracts. Monitor regulatory developments. They'll often codify aspects of the framework like disclosure and supplier due diligence. The smart approach is to design adaptable governance that meets current rules and scales for future obligations.
We've covered a lot: governance, SBOMs, metrics, contracts, scenario exercises. Before we wrap up, what are 3 practical actions every leader can commit to this week?
3 concrete actions. 1. Brief the board with a 1-page risk summary and ask for explicit acceptance of supply chain risk appetite. 2. Launch a critical suppliers inventory and tiering exercise. Identify the top 20 suppliers by business impact. 3. Insert a standard contract addendum requiring basic security attestations and timely incident notification for all new critical contracts. Simple, measurable, and sets momentum.
Those are actionable and not overwhelming. Last thought. The framework update is clearly about responsibilities aggregating upward and outward. If you had to leave listeners with a single image or metaphor to carry forward, what would it be?
Picture an orchestra. The musicians are technical teams, procurement, legal, and suppliers. Governance is the conductor. It doesn't play every instrument, but it sets tempo, dynamics, and cues. Without a conductor, the orchestra might still make noise, but it won't perform the symphony. Good governance brings harmony, timing, and an ability to recover if a violin snaps a string.
I like that, and maybe throw in a little humor. Nobody likes the conductor until the violin breaks. To close, what should listeners be pondering over the next month?
Ask yourself, who in my organization would be blamed if a supplier caused a major outage? If the answer is vague, you have work to do. Also ponder the true cost of supplier opacity. Is convenience today worth potential disruption tomorrow? Those questions can recalibrate strategy faster than any technical fix.
Perfect. That leaves us with a clear, practical, and surprisingly musical takeaway. Thanks for unpacking this with clarity and a little wit.
My pleasure. Governance and supply chains are where cybersecurity's future will be won or lost. Thoughtful action now saves headaches later. Curious to see how listeners translate this into their own playbooks.
And with that, we'll leave our audience with one final nudge. Who's the conductor in your cybersecurity orchestra? And when was the last time they actually raised the baton? Thanks for listening.
A special thank you to MarketUS.com for furnishing us this information. You can reach them at MarketUS.com or call them at 954-636-3232. Before we go, this deep dive was created by the MarketUS.com team. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. It's right below the subscribe link.